After decades of threats, they've finally done it. Starfleet Academy, and nobody's happy. Conservatives think it's too woke. The Trekkies think it's not real Star Trek. Even the Ferengi are mad. But the Trekkies do have a point. The original Star Trek is about as versatile a premise for a TV show as you can ask for. You've got a group of explorers flying around the galaxy. They go to different planets and get in adventures. Sometimes there's a moral or ethical dilemma to wrestle with. If you're running short on cash, you can do an episode set entirely on the ship. Or you can come up with some reason that the planet looks exactly like 1920s Earth and shoot it in the backlot. But for some reason, the people running this franchise have decided that what people really want are stories about the mythology of Star Trek. They want to explore past eras of the fictional timeline, or see the early years of their favorite characters, or learn the origin of the Federation, which the original series didn't even bother to invent until halfway through its first season. The concept of Starfleet Academy was first pitched by producer Ralph Winter back during the development of Star Trek IV: The Voyage Home. It was originally called Star Trek: The First Adventure, and it was going to focus on the early days of Kirk, Spock, and McCoy. At the time, the original series cast was getting a little long in the tooth, and they were also asking for more and more money to come back for each installment. So the idea was that you could recast the characters with younger and cheaper actors, and maybe bring the original actors back for some bookend scenes at the beginning and end. Producer Harve Bennett, who had revived the Star Trek movie series after the box office disappointment of Star Trek: The Motion Picture, developed a script and got a green light from Paramount, which slated the movie for a 1991 release to coincide with the 25th anniversary of the original series debut. Bennett was picturing Ethan Hawke as Kirk and John Cusack as Spock, describing it as a gift to the fans of the 25th anniversary. But the gift was not well received. After Star Trek creator Gene Roddenberry started shit-talking the movie on the convention circuit, angry letters flooded into Paramount from fans demanding that the old crew be brought back together in honor of the big anniversary. So, Starfleet Academy got scrapped, and Wrath of Khan director Nicholas Meyer was brought back for what became Star Trek VI: The Undiscovered Country. But the Starfleet Academy idea never really went away. In 2004, Harve Bennett pitched it to Paramount chairwoman Sherry Lansing, who loved the idea, and they apparently came pretty close to going forward with it. But Paramount's TV division, which at the time was producing Star Trek Enterprise, was worried that a second Star Trek prequel project would cause confusion in the marketplace. So the idea was backburnered again. J.J. Abrams' 2009 Star Trek movie incorporated some elements of the original pitch, although apparently not enough for Harve Bennett to get any of the back end. And then finally, in 2022, Paramount Plus announced that Alex Kurtzman would be producing a new version of Starfleet Academy set in the timeline of Star Trek Discovery. Personally, I have never understood the appeal of the Starfleet Academy concept. Star Trek is not a mythology show. Starfleet is not the equivalent of the Jedi Order, where you're really invested in its history and its customs. The original series didn't nail down the idea of Starfleet as a specific organization until they needed to do a court-martial, because for that sort of story to work, you need to define who it is that's holding your heroes to account. Starfleet is just the container that holds the story. It's not the story in and of itself. But that's not even the main issue with this new show. The problem with this show is the same problem that's plagued almost all of these franchise expansion streaming shows over the past 6 years or so: poor construction and bad execution. This iteration of Starfleet Academy is set about 850 years after Star Trek: The Next Generation, at a time when the Federation has fractured and Starfleet has fallen into disarray due to a galaxy-wide cataclysm called the Burn. We start off with a prologue set on some remote mining planet where we meet Anisha Mirror and her son Caleb. She's been summoned in front of some sort of tribunal, chaired by Starfleet Captain Nala Aki, to answer for the crime of having hijacked a shuttlecraft, resulting in the death of the pilot. Her co-conspirator in this crime is Nus Braka, played by Paul Giamatti, who has set his phasers to maximum scenery chewing and is really the only enjoyable aspect of this whole thing. So, Nus Braka gets sent off to a gulag somewhere, Anisha is sentenced to a rehabilitation center, and Caleb is left with Nala, who promises to look after him. But little Caleb is crafty. He swipes Nala's comm badge and escapes into a raging sandstorm. Then we cut to 15 years later, where the main action of the series takes place. Now, this opening isn't terrible. It certainly isn't subtle, but it works well enough to introduce the characters, and you're kind of intrigued by what the deal is with Giamatti's character. But when we next see Nala, who's being approached by a Starfleet admiral to take over the chancellorship of the Academy, we learn that she was profoundly disturbed by all this. In fact, she was so disturbed by it that she immediately resigned from Starfleet. Resigned in disgrace, as she puts it. And this was the first real head-scratching moment for me, because there's nothing in the way Holly Hunter plays that first scene that suggests that she's committing some heinous act in passing sentence on this woman. She's clearly sympathetic to Anisha, and you can see that she feels a great deal of empathy for her son. But you don't see any indication that she thinks she's committing a grievous injustice as she's pronouncing judgment. And because we know so little about what it is that Anisha actually did, it's hard to tell why this was such a monstrous moral transgression. But it's clearly meant to be. In the 15 years later scene, Nala tells the Admiral that she should have refused to pass a sentence. He says that Federation laws were particularly strict at the time and there was no room for exceptions. And she says,
separating children from their parents isn't exceptional. It's reprehensible.
But I mean, it sort of depends on the circumstances, doesn't it? Like, what if the kid's mother is a serial killer? What if she's spending months at a time in an opium-induced haze while her child languishes in a pool of his own filth? I mean, like, obviously that's not the situation here. But the problem is, we don't really know what the situation is. My understanding, when I first watched this, was that Anisha had fallen in with a charismatic career criminal who was able to solve a very real problem that she had. But then as things went on, it got further and further out of control, and this culminated in a robbery that left someone dead. This was basically how she described it. And I get that this is supposed to be a Les Miserables thing, where they're starving and only stealing food out of desperation. When he's first brought in, Nosbraka makes a snide comment to Anisha about how malnourishment looks good on her. The thing is, she doesn't look malnourished. Her son looks like he's ready to shoot a Burger King commercial. And at least from the way the charges are read out in the scene, it seems like she did more than just accept the stolen goods. She's described as an accomplice, which makes it sound like she actively participated in this heist that resulted in the shuttle pilot getting killed. So it's not clear what the moral message is here. Is it, if you're a mother trying to provide for her child, literally anything you do in pursuit of that is justifiable, even if it results in the death of a presumably innocent bystander? I mean, maybe that is the moral, but it's a weird one. And anyway, she doesn't get sentenced to a penal colony like Nosbraka does. She gets sent to a rehabilitation center, which at least in the original Star Trek world wasn't some sinister euphemism. I mean, sometimes it was. But she's going to have visitation rights, and the kid's going to go to this nice school that we see later. It seems fairly humane. And I don't mean to harp on this, but this really is crucial to Holly Hunter's entire character. Later on, she tells Caleb that we made a horrible and catastrophic decision that robbed you and your mother of a future. So this wasn't just bad, it was a kind of atrocity. But nothing about how the prologue is written or performed gives you any sense that those are the stakes at play. And that sets the whole story off on a bad foot. But anyway, back to the future. When we catch up with the now-grown Caleb, we learn that he's become quite the career criminal himself. He's been arrested by some aliens called Chirathans for hacking into their government databases. But he's also a super badass. He manages to overpower 2 hulking guards and take control of the shuttle transporting him to prison. But then he stops to call his mom, which will be a recurring issue with this guy, and the Chirathans regain control of the situation and put him back into custody. That's where Nala comes in. She's learned of Caleb's predicament, and she jumps on the opportunity to try and rectify the terrible wrong that she did to him all those years ago. Because luckily, the Federation has a treaty with the Chirathans, which means that Caleb can have his sentence commuted if he agrees to join Starfleet Academy. And this is just the first of many totally contrived plot mechanisms in this thing. The Chirathans, we're told, are a culture so draconian that they punish theft by cutting off your fingers, one by one, then chopping off the rest of your hand and forcing you to dig tunnels with the stubs. Or you can do community service. This kind of reminds me of the old Eddie Izzard bit about the Church of England.
Cake or death? Cake, please.
But despite the whole finger chopping thing, Caleb isn't sure he wants the cake. The last thing his mother told him was to never trust the Federation, and spending his formative years fighting for survival on the streets has left him emotionally and psychologically traumatized and deeply skeptical that anyone in authority actually gives a damn about his best interests. Or at least that's what he's supposed to be. Star Trek should really not try to do characters like this because they're really bad at it. There's just this superficiality and posturing to the way this character is portrayed that makes it all seem totally fake. He just comes off as this pissy suburban teen who's trying to act tough. There's never a second while you're watching this scene that you think there's any chance it will end with anything other than him agreeing to go with Nala to the Academy. And it just makes the whole thing tedious and perfunctory. So finally, after 20 minutes or so of exposition and table setting, we arrive at the starship Athena, Starfleet Academy's mobile classroom, where we meet the incoming class of officer candidates. And this is where the nerdy part of me starts to get really agitated. Like I said, the details of Starfleet, what it is, how it works, aren't really that important. But everything we've ever heard about Starfleet Academy is that it is sort of the Star Trek equivalent of West Point. It's an elite institution that takes only the best of the best, or at least it was. This iteration of Starfleet Academy not only admits convicted criminals on work release, but based on the announcements we hear on the intercom, they seem to be taking walk-ins. Like, there's this one chick who goes to see the doctor because she swallowed her comm badge. You know, I keep notes as I watch these things, and when this scene happened, I jotted down the dialogue. I swallowed my comm badge, and next to it, I just wrote the note, brain damaged? I mean, if that's your level of intellectual development, you should probably not be getting recruited into a prestigious quasi-military organization. You should be running for president. You'd be great at it. But anyway, from amongst this sea of barely functional youth, we are introduced to what is presumably the core cast of this ongoing series. And these people are so dull that I can't even be bothered to remember their names. You've got the Fresh Prince of Venus, or wherever he's supposed to be from, Girl Boss Sally, and this chick, who we're told is a holographic life form, like the Doctor from Voyager, who's also here for some reason. And this is just pedantic, but things like this drive me nuts. Because she's not a holographic life form. She's an AI. Like, the program that's creating her is not stored inside of the hologram. It's stored in a computer that emits the hologram. The program is the person. The hologram is just how the program interacts with human beings. It would be like if someone asked you what a MacBook is and you said, it's a keyboard attached to a video screen. Like, technically accurate, but really missing the essence. And then there's the Klingon. I guess we have to blame Michael Dorn for this, but ever since the Next Generation decided that the Klingons are nice now, they have been so utterly one-note and useless. I mean, I guess Nuz Braka is supposed to be half Klingon, so he's an exception, but for the rest of them, it goes like this. I am a Klingon. I speak in a low, monotone register. I break my lines into small chunks of 1 to 4 words. Also, honor. Look, these are very poorly written characters, and the cutting edge of 1993 snarky teen dialogue isn't doing them any favors either. But these performances are so lacking in any kind of nuance or inner life that watching them is just slow torture. Everything is just posing and mugging. You never get the sense that they're doing anything but just reciting lines. And I understand that these are young actors who can't necessarily be expected to hang with the likes of Holly Hunter and Paul Giamatti, but you can expect more than this. And the fact that you do have Holly Hunter and Paul Giamatti to compare them to just makes it all the more glaring. I mean, the lines they gave Paul Giamatti are absolutely ridiculous, but he really makes a meal of it.
This moment is that chicken.
And the scene on the bridge between him and Holly Hunter, after Naz Braka has ambushed the Athena and taken control of the ship, is the only one of the whole episode that has any real spark of life to it, even though it feels kind of weird that she's having such a personal and snarky argument with him in full view of her officers and crew. So now we're getting into the climax. Naz Braka and his crew of pirates have disabled the ship by covering it with programmable matter, and they're down in the engine room in the process of stealing the ship's warp drive. But when Caleb finds out what happened, he says, "Programmable matter? I know all about programmable matter. I can fix this the same way I hacked the Tarathans." Now, when I first watched this, I was like, wait a minute. They didn't even set this up in any way. But I was wrong. They did, and in the most ham-handed way possible. It turns out that back in the beginning of the episode, when Holly Hunter comes to spring Caleb out of prison, she says, "They say you hacked the Imperial computer system. I'm thinking you use programmable matter." Because if there's one thing she knows about Caleb, it's that he's the kind of guy who brings programmable matter to a gunfight. Or any kind of fight, really. Girlfriend's mad at him, he sends in some programmable matter to deal with her. But that's it. It's this one line that exists solely to justify what's going to happen in the climax, and it's so out of context that it doesn't stick in your head. So anyway, Caleb knows all about programmable matter, and he's got this plan of how to save the ship. This sets off this just impenetrable flurry of technobabble, which has been the absolute bane of Star Trek's existence going all the way back to the Next Generation. I completely glazed over the details of this plan the first time I watched it because it's so boring. But as a reviewer, I feel an obligation to provide my audience with accurate information. So I went back and put on the subtitles. And what I learned was this. The programmable matter is a proprietary design that is resonating on a specific frequency. It has integrated with the ship's systems, making it indistinguishable from the ship on sensors. Now, As we all know, all programmable matter has its own atomic coefficient. So, if Caleb can get that number from one of the disseminators on the hull, he can set up a mirror primary key. With that key, he can then neutralize the integration actuators, thus freeing the ship. Now, I know what you're thinking. This all seems fine and good, but how is he going to break the frequency isolation coefficient? Guess what? It turns out that the hologram chick is super good at stuff like that. She can scan all the frequencies to find the one they need to send the hack. Ah, you say. But wouldn't it be better to scan a sample of active matter so he can build it into the sequence instead of running a randomizing algorithm? Well, that would require someone to go out in the hull, and unfortunately, all the EV suits have some weird security thing that won't allow the students to activate them for some reason. But guess what? It turns out that the Fresh Prince of Venus is actually some kind of alien fish creature who, it just so happens, can survive in the icy vacuum of space for exactly the amount of time that they need. This whole thing is basically the lazy screenwriter's version of reprogramming the Kobayashi Maru. You contrive a climax where you've got a problem caused by a made-up technology. This made-up technology also has a made-up technological solution. And that made-up technological solution just happens to perfectly align with the made-up technological skill sets that you've assigned to your lead characters. The whole purpose of this episode and this climax is to show us why, out of all the kids at Starfleet Academy, it's the special qualities of these kids that make them worthy of being the focus of this TV show. But all you've demonstrated here is that they just happen to have the specific skills needed to deal with this very specific scenario. So if the climax had involved around a plumbing problem, I guess the show would be about the plumber's kid. You've got no sense of how these characters would deal with a problem that wasn't custom designed for them to solve. And if you want to see what I mean by that, you can go back and watch the Corbomite Maneuver from the original 1960s Star Trek. This was only the second episode they produced after the failed original pilot, and it was the first episode to include Dr. McCoy. In this episode, the Enterprise finds itself at the mercy of a hostile ship with superior technology, much like the Athena in Starfleet Academy. But this situation is much more dire. The enemy captain, Balog, announces that the Enterprise has trespassed on his territory, and the punishment for this is death. Kirk and the crew try everything they can think of to resolve this problem. They try running away, they try fighting, they try diplomacy. Nothing works. They're told that they have 10 minutes to make peace with their god, and then the Enterprise will be destroyed. Kirk turns to Spock. What's your analysis? Spock says, it's like chess. When you're out of moves, it's checkmate. Kirk thinks about this for a minute, and then he says,
Not chess, Mr. Spock. Poker.
He calls up Balog. He says, Earth custom requires me to let you know that this ship is constructed out of a material called Corbomite. Now, the really interesting thing about Corbomite is that if you attack it, it reflects back an equal amount of energy as it absorbs. This has the effect of also destroying the attacking ship. And then he adds,
Death has little meaning to us. If it has none to you, then attack us now.
It's a bluff. And the bluff works. And you don't need to go back and turn on the subtitles and write detailed notes to understand why it works. And in the process, it also tells you everything you need to know about James T. Kirk and why he's the hero of the show. And that is why they're still making Star Trek 70 years later. Because at its best, it's about memorable, compelling human beings, not technology. You can imagine how Picard or Sisko or Pike would deal with that same scenario. But how would Caleb handle it? It doesn't involve either of the two things he knows how to do, which is hack programmable matter and beat people up. I guess he would get mad and yell. Maybe he'd try to call his mom again. I honestly don't know, but I do know that I've been given no reason to care. And I can't imagine wanting to watch the next episode to see if I'm going to be given one. I actually wasn't going to watch this episode, but then I thought, hey, I'm starting a YouTube channel. This new Star Trek show will be a great opportunity to post timely content. But now it's been about 3 weeks since it came out, and it's such old news that I'm assuming this video is probably going to get about 5 views. But if you are one of those viewers and you've made it this far, you should subscribe to my channel. This was my pilot episode, so it can only get better from here. And hopefully I've made a better case for myself than these bozos. See you back here soon.